At 4 a.m., I went downstairs thinking I heard something simple, maybe the furnace, maybe the cat. But what I saw in my son's basement froze my blood. And within seconds I grabbed the kids and ran out into the cold darkness. If you're a parent or grandparent, stay with me because this moment changed everything. I did not wake up that morning because of a sound or a light or anything ordinary that stirs a person from sleep. I woke up because something inside me pulled me from my dreams with a grip so tight it felt like a hand on my shoulder. There was a deep uneasy stirring in my chest, a warning that did not come from fear but from something older and wiser inside me. I have lived long enough to know that when that kind of feeling wakes you before dawn, you listen. You do not roll over. You do not say later. You do not ignore it like a passing shadow. You sit up, you breathe, you pay attention because something is speaking that rarely speaks unless danger is near. At first I thought maybe it was the cold air in the room or the quiet stillness of the house, but that feeling did not fade. It sat heavy as a stone right in the center of my heart. It felt like the kind of weight a mother carries when something is wrong with her children, even when they are grown. It felt like every instinct in my body was whispering at once, telling me something in that house was not right. I tried to slow my breathing long enough to sort out what I was sensing, but the harder I tried, the louder the feeling became, until it felt like a voice inside me shouting, "Wake up and look around." I slipped out of bed quietly so I would not wake the children sleeping in the next room. They had been excited to have me stay the night, and I had tucked them in with a warm smile and soft kisses on their foreheads, never imagining that a few hours later I would be following a trail of fear through the dark. I stood in the hallway, letting my eyes adjust to the shadows. The clock on the wall glowed 4 in the morning, the hour where the world holds its breath, the hour where truth rises from places that daylight hides. As I stood there, something strange washed over me. The house felt too still, not peaceful still, but tense still, like the walls were holding something in or holding something back. I could not hear the usual soft hum of a sleeping home, no gentle shifting, no faint sighs, no whisper of movement upstairs or down. It was as if the whole place had gone hollow, like all life had retreated somewhere out of sight. My skin prickled with the sensation that I was not alone, even though the house looked quiet. I whispered a prayer under my breath, asking for clarity, asking for protection, asking to see what needed to be seen. I moved slowly, feeling the cool floor under my feet, the kind of cool that creeps into your bones and makes you aware of every step you take. I walked past the living room where toys were scattered on the rug and the faint smell of last night's dinner still lingered. Everything looked normal, but that heavy feeling inside me kept tugging at my heart, urging me toward something unseen. I paused at the door leading to the children's room and gently eased it open. I felt a momentary wave of comfort when I saw them sleeping peacefully, tangled in their blankets, their small hands resting beside them, their breaths steady and soft. For a moment I thought maybe the feeling had been nothing at all, maybe just my old nerves acting up for no reason. But the moment I stepped back into the hallway, that weight returned heavier than before, like an unseen hand pushing me forward. Something in that house was calling me, and I knew it was not coming from the children. I followed the sensation like a thread pulling me through the dark. It led me toward the back of the house, past the pantry, past the door to the garage, and toward the narrow stairway that led down into the basement. I stopped at the top of the stairs because the door there was slightly open. That door was never open at night. My son always kept it shut because the basement was chilly and drafty, and he did not want the cold air rising up into the rest of the house. I had seen him close it every night, even when he was half asleep. Yet here it was at 4 in the morning, cracked open, like something had passed through it, or like someone had forgotten to close it after going down there in the dark. My stomach tightened with a deep, sick twist. That was the moment I knew the feeling that woke me was not imagination. Something was waiting for me down there, something that wanted to stay hidden but no longer could. I touched the door lightly and it creaked as if it had been holding its breath too. I peered down into the stairwell and felt a cold rush of air rise up to meet me, the kind of cold that does not come from a draft but from a presence that has no warmth. For a moment I stood frozen, with the kind of stillness that comes right before a storm. Every instinct in me screamed to turn back, to gather the children, to run out the front door and never look back. But another voice, deeper and steadier, said, "Keep going. You need to know. You need to see. You cannot protect what you do not face." So I placed my hand on the railing and began my slow descent into the darkness. With each step the air grew heavier, thicker, as if I were walking into another world. The wooden steps creaked under my weight and the sound echoed through the hollow quiet of the basement. I felt my pulse beating loudly in my ears like a drum counting down to something I could not yet name. Halfway down I stopped because I heard something, a faint noise so soft it almost disappeared into the shadows. It was not a voice, not a thump, not anything clear enough to identify, but it carried the shape of danger in it. My breath caught in my throat and I forced myself to continue stepping down until my feet reached the cold basement floor. I stood there in the dim light of the single bulb that flickered above me. The room was filled with boxes and old furniture and the kind of forgotten things that gather dust over the years, but the moment I stepped forward I felt it again. That sensation, that warning, that silent shout in my spirit saying, do not ignore this. I looked around slowly, scanning every corner, every shadow, every space where something might hide. My eyes landed on a part of the basement I had never paid attention to before, a part that seemed strangely disturbed, as if someone had been there recently, moving things, shifting things, doing something that should not have been done at 4 in the morning. That was the moment something inside me whispered, go get the children now. And that was the moment I knew whatever I was about to discover would change everything. The moment I stepped back into the hallway after leaving the basement door behind me, I realized something else was wrong, something even deeper than the uneasy silence that had wrapped itself around the house like a heavy blanket. The stillness was not the gentle kind that comes from a home full of sleeping people. It was the tense, watchful kind that presses against the skin and makes the air feel thick and uneasy. I knew that kind of quiet. I had felt it before, in moments of danger and in moments when truth hid just beyond sight, waiting for courage to find it. That quiet makes your ears strain, makes your breath shallow, makes your instincts loud. It was the quiet of a place holding a secret. I stood there listening to the house around me, the walls, the shadows, the heavy darkness that seemed to breathe all on its own. There was no television hum, no heater clicking, no refrigerator buzz, no pipes moving, no cars outside rolling by. It was as if the world outside the windows had disappeared, if only for that hour, and the only thing left was the weight of something unseen. I pressed my hand against the wall, gently trying to steady myself, because something in the silence was pulling at my nerves like cold fingers brushing along my spine. I looked toward the living room where everything was in its usual place, yet something felt off. The toys scattered on the floor looked untouched, yet they felt like they were watching. The open book on the coffee table looked harmless, yet I felt like it was placed there to distract, not to relax. Even the family photos on the shelf seemed to stare with a stiffness that made my skin prickle. It was not the objects themselves that felt wrong. It was the silence around them, a silence that felt wrong in its very bones. I made my way through the house slowly, with each step feeling heavier than the last. I passed by the dining room where the table sat clean and empty, as if dinner had never happened. The chairs were pulled in neatly, but not with the usual ease. They were lined with a precision that felt too exact, too deliberate, too staged. The air around that table felt like a place where voices had once risen and fallen but were now swallowed by whatever lived in that quiet. I opened the door leading to the laundry room, hoping maybe I would hear the soft hum of the washing machine or the faint shuffle of clothing inside the dryer, something normal, something routine, something to break the tension. But the room was still, cold and hollow, with no sign of movement, no warmth, no sound, no life. Even the machines felt frozen in place, like they too were holding their breath. I stepped back into the hallway and felt the tension tighten again, wrapping around me like a rope. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it clung like a shadow that would not loosen. I moved toward the kitchen next, thinking maybe the refrigerator would offer some faint hum, some grounding sense of normal life, but even in that room the silence was thick enough to make my ears ring. I placed my hand on the counter, feeling the smooth surface, hoping for something steady, something real, something safe. But instead I felt the cold of the countertop run through my fingertips and settle somewhere deep in my chest. I walked toward the window above the sink and looked out into the backyard. The yard was still dark except for the faint early morning glow creeping behind the trees. No dogs barking, no lights from neighbors, no cars passing by. Nothing. It was like the entire world had paused. I could feel my heart beating in slow, heavy thumps, each one reminding me that something was very wrong and the house was trying to hide it. I turned away from the window and took a few steps toward the hallway again when I heard a faint sound behind me. It was not loud, but in that dead quiet it felt like a sudden shout. It was a soft click like a door settling or wood shifting or a breath escaping someone who did not want to be heard. It came from somewhere near the basement door or somewhere inside the walls or maybe somewhere inside my own fear. But it was enough to send a rush of cold through me. I froze in place listening with every part of my body. My ears strained, my breath stilled, my heartbeat sped up until it felt like it echoed right off the walls. The sound did not repeat, but its presence was enough to confirm what my instincts had been saying since the moment I woke up. The quiet was not natural. It was not peaceful. It was not safe. It was waiting. I turned slowly, looking down the hallway toward the bedrooms where the children slept. The silence around their rooms felt different. It was softer, gentler, warmer. That told me their rooms were not the source of the heaviness. Whatever was creating the tension in the house was somewhere else. Somewhere hidden, somewhere dangerous. I walked toward their room again just to be sure they were still sleeping safely. I opened the door a little wider, this time letting the faint hallway light slip inside. The children were still there, sound asleep, unaware of the strange energy surrounding the house, unaware of the darkness curling through the walls, unaware that their grandmother stood guard with worry building in her bones. I leaned against the doorway and watched them for a few moments, feeling the tender rise and fall of their small breaths ease my heart just a little. But the moment I stepped back into the hallway, the heaviness returned stronger than before, as if it felt me leaving the warm safety of the children and wanted to pull me back into its cold grip. I could feel it pressing behind me, urging me forward, pushing me toward the truth that waited elsewhere. I looked toward the basement again, the door still cracked open, the cold from below seeping upward in thin invisible strands. The pull in my spirit grew sharper, louder, almost unbearable. I whispered to myself that I needed to be brave, that I needed to keep moving, that I needed to understand what this silent house was hiding, because only then could I protect the children. Only then could I make sense of the fear curling in my stomach. Only then could I decide whether we should stay or run. I took another deep breath and walked slowly toward the basement door again, letting that uneasy quiet guide me, because now I knew without a doubt that the silence in that house was trying to speak. It was trying to warn me. It was trying to show me something. And I had to listen. When I reached the top of the basement stairs again, I felt something inside me shift, like a curtain being pulled aside to reveal a truth I had been trying not to see. The door was still open, just a sliver, but that sliver felt like an invitation and a warning at the same time. It stood there silent and watchful, like an eye half open in the dark. I had lived long enough to know that doors that should be closed do not open on their own at 4 in the morning. Something or someone had gone down there, and something or someone might still be down there. I stared at that crack of darkness and felt a cold tremor glide through me. I placed my hand gently on the edge of the door and pushed it open just enough to see the stairs again, stretching downward like a path into a place that held its breath. The air that rose up from below was thick and heavy and carried a scent that did not belong in any normal home. It was a mix of damp, cold, and something metallic and sharp that made my chest tighten. My skin prickled as if tiny needles brushed against it, urging me to step back, urging me to walk away, urging me to grab the children and leave without a second glance. But another voice inside me, stronger and older, said, "You must see, you must know, you cannot protect what you refuse to face." I tightened my fingers around the railing and slowly stepped down the first stair, then the second, then the third. Each step creaked beneath me, sounding louder than it should in the suffocating quiet, as if warning whatever was hidden below that I was coming. Halfway down I felt the cold wrap around my ankles like something reaching out of the darkness. I wanted to turn back, but something in that basement called me forward. A whisper without words, a presence without shape, a truth without mercy. When I reached the bottom, my breath formed a faint mist in the air. The single bulb overhead flickered weakly, casting shadows that moved across the boxes and old furniture like dark creatures crawling in the corners. I stood very still, letting my eyes adjust, letting my instincts settle, letting the room reveal itself piece by piece. The silence down there felt different from the silence upstairs. Up there it had been suffocating and strange. Down here it felt alive, almost aware. It watched me from every side, though nothing moved. I took a few slow steps forward and immediately noticed footprints on the dusty floor. Not mine. Not recent enough to be from the last time my son carried boxes down here. The prints were too deep, too scattered, too frantic. They told a story of someone who had been rushing, moving back and forth, pacing or searching or hiding something. My heart pounded harder and a slow fear rose up my spine. I knelt a little to look closer and saw that the dust was disturbed all around the footprints as if something heavy had been dragged or set down. I stood up again and followed the prints deeper into the basement past the shelves of old books and plastic bins filled with holiday decorations. The deeper I went the colder it became until the air felt like it wrapped around my bones. The bulb above me flickered once twice then steadied just enough for me to keep moving. My hand brushed against an old cabinet and I felt a vibration not from the cabinet itself but from the stillness around it as if something beyond the wood was humming in quiet tension. I turned my attention to the far corner of the basement, a place I had barely noticed before because it was always cluttered with storage and forgotten belongings. But now that corner looked different. Things had been moved, the boxes pushed aside, the floor cleared in a way that revealed something on the ground that I had never seen before. I stepped closer though every instinct shouted stop, do not go any further, do not uncover what you are not ready to see. But love for my grandchildren pushed me forward. I could not afford fear. I could not afford hesitation. I needed to know what kind of danger surrounded them. So I crouched down and brushed my hand lightly over the floor. And that is when I saw it. A small dark stain dried into the concrete. Not paint, not spilled drink. A stain that carried a color that needed no explanation. My breath caught in my throat and the room seemed to tilt for a moment as the truth tried to claw its way into my mind. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer asking for wisdom and strength. When I opened them again the stain was still there, dark and silent and honest. I forced myself to stand and look around the corner behind the stacks of boxes. And that was when my breath stopped entirely. There was a metal table set up where none had been before. A table with straps. A table with scratches. A table that did not belong in a family home. A table that spoke of fear, of control, of something dangerous. I stepped back with a jolt, my heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. My hands shook as I covered my mouth trying to steady myself. I had never expected to find something like that in my son's home. Never expected to stand in the place where something dark had taken root right beneath the feet of the children who slept above me. I felt sick. I felt cold. I felt a fire rise inside me that I had never felt before. Anger, fear, heartbreak all twisted into a force that made my legs weak and my vision blur. Then I heard it. A faint soft sound like a breath being taken somewhere in the basement behind me. I spun around but saw nothing but shadows and boxes and that flickering bulb. But I knew I was not alone. I could feel the presence of someone watching me, someone who had been down there recently, someone who might still be hiding in the darkness. My pulse raced as I stepped back toward the stairs, keeping my eyes on every corner, every shadow, every inch of the room. I whispered, you will not touch my grandchildren, not ever. And with each step backward I felt my strength returning. I reached the bottom of the stairs and turned only when I felt the air shift behind me. I did not run but I moved quickly up each stair, gripping the railing tightly as the cold behind me seemed to follow like a shadow clinging to my heels. When I reached the top I closed the basement door as quietly as I could and placed my hand against it, breathing hard. I felt sweat on my forehead though the house was still icy cold. The silence upstairs now made sense. It was the silence of something hidden. Something waiting. Something dangerous living under the same roof as my grandchildren. And I knew at that moment that I could not leave them there another second. I had seen enough. I had felt enough. I had discovered enough to know that whatever was going on in that basement was not just strange or odd. It was a threat, a danger, a reason to run. And that was the moment I made up my mind. I would gather those children quietly, gently, quickly, and I would run before the sun rose, before anyone woke, before the danger downstairs had a chance to reach them. I moved through the hallway with slow and careful steps because every sound felt sharper and louder in the early morning silence. My heart beat fast but steady, like it had accepted its duty and was now guiding me through the house with purpose. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting something or someone to appear from the shadows. Every shadow felt deeper, every creak felt warning, every moment felt stretched thin, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. I reached the top of the stairs and listened again to the air around me. There was no movement, no whisper, no sign that anyone had heard me come up from the basement. But a feeling still pressed on the back of my neck, telling me that whatever was down there was not asleep and not gone. I walked toward the children's room because I needed to see them with my own eyes, needed to feel the warmth of their small bodies and know they were safe. When I opened the door slowly, I found them sleeping peacefully under soft blankets with tiny breaths rising and falling like gentle waves on a quiet shore. The sight brought a sting of tears to my eyes. They looked so innocent, so untouched by fear, so unaware of the danger that lay beneath their little feet. I felt a fierce protective force rise inside me, stronger than anything I had ever felt. I stood beside their beds for a moment, just letting that love anchor me, giving me the strength I needed for what came next. I reached out and brushed a lock of hair from the older child's forehead and whispered a silent promise that I would not let anything harm them. My hands shook, but I refused to let fear paralyze me. I had learned long ago that fear is simply a sign that something precious needs protecting. I took a deep breath and whispered, "Wake up, sweethearts, wake up, we need to go." My voice was low and gentle but firm enough that they stirred almost instantly. The older child blinked up at me with sleepy confusion while the younger one curled closer to their blanket as if the world outside their dreams could wait a little longer. I whispered again, urging them softly to sit up and take my hands. They looked at me with questions in their eyes, questions I did not have time to answer. There was no space for explanations, no space for comfort, no space for long reassurances. There was only time to move. They trusted me enough to follow without understanding, and that trust nearly broke my heart. I reached for their coats hanging on the small hooks near the door. The fabric felt cold and thin, but it would have to do because I could not risk turning on any lights or making any noise that might alert whoever or whatever was still awake in the house. I slipped their coats on, gently shushing them when they tried to speak. Their little voices sounded too loud even when barely above a whisper. I placed a finger over my lips and they nodded with wide eyes. I guided them out of the room step by step, lifting the smaller one to keep his feet from tapping against the floorboards. The hallway felt longer than ever, stretching into the darkness like a path I had to cross before time ran out. My breath felt heavy in my chest and I kept hearing faint sounds behind me, sounds that might have been the house settling or might have been something else entirely. When we reached the top of the stairs, I paused and listened again. Still nothing. No footsteps. No doors. No movement. But the silence felt wrong in a way I could not ignore. The children pressed close to me, their small bodies trembling either from the cold or from sensing my fear. I hugged them both for a brief second, letting their warmth give me courage. Then I began to lead them down the stairs, one step at a time, keeping my hand tightly around the railing and my eyes on the bottom of the staircase. Every step creaked slightly even when I tried to distribute my weight carefully. Each sound felt like an alarm ringing through the house, announcing our escape. The children clung to my sides with tiny fingers digging into my clothes as if they knew that speed and silence mattered more than anything. When we reached the bottom, I exhaled quietly, but relief did not come. Something in the air felt different, thicker, heavier, colder. It was the kind of air that warned you not to look behind you, not to acknowledge the presence you could feel only with the primal part of your spirit. I moved quickly toward the front door. The hallway felt too narrow, too dark, too still. I could hear the faint tick of the clock on the wall and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. But beneath those normal sounds there was something else. A faint rhythmic noise, like slow breathing in a place where no one should have been awake. I tightened my grip on the children's hands and urged them quietly forward. My fingers brushed the edge of the table near the door and I felt the cold surface ground me like a reminder that I had to stay clear-headed to get them out safely. I reached for the lock and turned it slowly to avoid making noise. The metal clicked softly, but even that tiny sound echoed in the quiet house. I froze for a moment, staring into the darkness behind me, waiting to see if anything moved. The children held their breath with me as if they could sense how important this silence was. I pushed the door open gently, letting the cold pre-dawn air wash over us. The fresh air felt sharp and clean compared to the heavy pressure inside the house. It gave me a brief surge of hope. I bent down and whispered to the children to step outside very quietly and not let go of my hands. Their little boots tapped lightly on the porch, but the sound felt far enough away from the basement to be safe. We stepped out into the dim light of the street where the world still slept peacefully, unaware of the danger we were escaping. I pulled the door shut slowly and made sure it did not slam. The moment it closed I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was only a momentary relief because I knew we were not safe until we were far away. I lifted the smaller child into my arms because he had begun to shiver in the cold air and because I wanted to move quickly without slowing down. The older child held tightly to my coat as we hurried down the driveway. The grass glistened faintly with frost and our breaths rose in pale clouds. Every sound around us seemed magnified: the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the faint hum of a car on the far road. But the house behind me remained quiet, too still. We reached my car and I opened the back door, ushering the children inside. My hands shook as I buckled them in, but I forced myself to stay steady. I closed the door softly, then moved around to the driver's seat, my eyes constantly darting to the house. I slid into the seat and inserted the key, trying to turn it as quietly as possible. The engine hummed to life with a low vibration that sounded louder than thunder to my anxious ears. I pulled out of the driveway slowly, keeping my gaze fixed forward, refusing to look back at the house until we were farther away. When we reached the end of the street I allowed myself a single glance in the rearview mirror. The house stood still and dark like it always did, but I could not shake the feeling that something inside it was watching us leave. I turned the corner and continued driving, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, my heart pounding as if urging the car to move faster. The children finally whispered questions from the back seat, soft, timid questions about why we had left so early and why I looked so scared. I swallowed hard, trying to find the words to reassure them without lying and without revealing the terror that still clung to my thoughts. I told them quietly that we were going somewhere safe, that everything would be all right, that they were brave, and that I loved them more than anything in the world. As the road stretched ahead, the sky slowly began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The gentle colors of morning made the world seem softer and safer, but I knew that the danger we left behind was not gone. It lived in that basement. It lived in the silence. It lived in whatever twisted truth I had uncovered. And I knew this was only the beginning of what I would have to face to keep them safe. When I finally reached the main road with the children safely in the back seat, I felt a trembling deep inside my chest that I could not contain. It was not fear alone and not relief alone, but something tangled in between. My hands were steady on the wheel, but inside I felt like the ground under my feet had shifted forever. I kept glancing at the children through the mirror, seeing their wide eyes watching the world outside the window, unsure and shaken but trusting me without a second thought. That trust pressed heavy on my heart because I knew that what I had seen in that basement had changed everything for them and for me and for the family we thought we had. The sky was turning a pale silver as the first light of dawn touched the tops of the trees. I drove with slow and careful purpose because my thoughts were running faster than the tires beneath us. I could still see the images from the basement in flashes, like bright, sharp slices of memory that cut each time they appeared. The sound, the smell, the heavy stillness, all of it clung to me like a shadow. The truth was too heavy to speak out loud, yet too dangerous to keep inside for too long. I knew I needed to tell someone, but I also knew I had to choose that person with great care, because one wrong decision could place the children right back in harm's path. As I drove, I kept replaying the moment when I first walked into that basement at 4 in the morning. The tension, the unnatural quiet, the flicker of that little light in the corner, and the impossible scene that greeted me had carved itself into my mind. It was a warning, a sign, a message that something dark had been growing right under my feet while I slept in that house, believing I was helping my family. My son and daughter-in-law had no idea what they had invited into their home, and the thought of how close the children had been to that danger made my throat tighten with a painful pull. The children whispered softly to each other behind me, their voices thin and shaky like they were afraid the morning light might shatter if they spoke too loudly. I listened carefully to every sound because the silence between their words reminded me how fragile they felt right now. I wanted to reach back and hold both of their hands at once, but I knew I could not take my hands off the wheel even for a moment. Sometimes strength looks like holding on with both hands and trusting that love alone will carry the rest. We reached the small gas station on the edge of town, and I pulled into a parking spot away from the windows so no one inside could see us clearly. My heart raced again because stopping meant slowing down, and slowing down meant thinking. I needed a plan that made sense, a plan that protected us, and a plan that would not fall apart the moment fear tried to shake my voice. I turned to face the children, and their little faces looked pale under the dim light of the morning. They were scared but they were brave too, and that mixture broke me and strengthened me all at once. I told them that we were going somewhere safe and that they would not have to go back to the house until I said so. Their small heads nodded in unison, though I could see the question in their eyes, the one they did not dare ask because they sensed how heavy the truth felt. I stepped out of the car and inhaled the cold morning air, letting it settle my thoughts. I could not tell them what I had seen because children should not be asked to understand nightmares that adults can barely survive. But I knew I needed help and I knew exactly who to call. I walked to the far side of the building where no one could see me and I pulled out my phone. The screen felt cold in my hands as I scrolled to the one number I had avoided using because I had not wanted to seem dramatic or foolish or overly emotional. But now I knew I had no choice. I dialed and the ring echoed through the quiet morning like a distant bell. When the voice answered on the other end, I felt my knees weaken with relief. It was someone who would listen, someone who would not judge, someone who had always believed me even when I doubted myself. I tried to explain what I had seen, but my voice trembled so hard the words tangled in my throat. I had to stop twice to catch my breath because the images flooded my mind with every attempt to describe them. The voice on the other end told me to breathe slowly and to take my time and to remember that the most important thing was that the children were safe. I nodded even though they could not see me, and I told them we were far from the house now. They told me they would meet me right away and that I should not move until they arrived. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me because knowing someone was coming made the weight on my shoulders feel just a little lighter. When I returned to the car, the children looked at me with silent hope. I offered them a soft smile because they needed something stable to hold onto, and right now that had to be me. I opened the back door and sat with them for a moment, letting them lean against me as I held them close. Their small bodies felt warm and fragile and precious, and I realized that nothing else mattered as long as they were safe. I whispered stories about the sunrise and how the world becomes beautiful when the night ends, hoping to fill their minds with something kinder than fear. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours, and I kept watching the entrance of the parking lot, waiting for a familiar car to appear. Every sound made my heart jump because I knew that even though we were far away, danger sometimes has a way of finding the people trying to escape it. But I stayed calm because letting fear control me would only make the children more frightened. Finally the car approached and I felt a swell of relief so strong I had to close my eyes to steady myself. When the door opened and the person stepped out, I felt my breath return in one long shuddering exhale. Help had arrived. Safety had arrived. Support had arrived. I stepped out of my car and walked to meet them with determined steps, not weak ones, because I needed them to know I was ready to fight for these children with everything I had. I explained what I had seen in full detail this time, though my voice still shook. The silence that followed my words was heavy and long and deeply concerned. They told me I had done the right thing, escaping immediately, and that what I had witnessed was something that could not be ignored or dismissed. They told me that action needed to be taken and that we would not go back to the house until officials had been involved. The children's safety was now the highest priority, and I felt a wave of gratitude sweep over me because finally someone else carried a piece of this terrible weight with me. When I returned to the children and told them we were going somewhere safe with someone who would help us, their faces softened with relief. They trusted me, and now they trusted the person with us, and that trust was a gift I would not let anyone break. I helped them into the other car and gathered their small bags from the trunk, my hands steady now because fear had transformed into purpose. As we drove away from the gas station, the world around us brightened into full morning. The children watched the passing scenery with tired eyes, and I watched them with renewed determination. I knew that what came next would not be easy. I knew that there would be questions, investigations, confrontations, and truths that would shake our family to its core. But I also knew that I would face all of it without hesitation, because when you see danger threaten the ones you love, you stop running from fear and start running toward protection. The children leaned against each other, drifting back to sleep, and I reached out to gently place my hand on their shoulders as a silent promise. Whatever waited ahead, we would face it together, and I would not let anyone or anything harm them again. The truth hidden in that basement had tried to break me, but instead it awakened a strength I had forgotten I had. And that strength was now the shield that would guard them from every shadow still lingering behind us. The sun had fully risen by the time we reached the safe place, and its light touched the ground like a gentle blessing. It felt strange to see something so peaceful when my mind was still tangled in fear. The children were awake now and looking around with quiet curiosity, unsure of where we were but trusting that they were no longer in danger. I carried the younger one on my hip while the older child held onto my sleeve with small trembling fingers. Every instinct in me felt wide awake, sharp, aware, and ready to protect them from any shadow, even the ones that lived only in memory. The person who had come to help guided us inside a warm building where the lights were soft and the air felt calm. Nothing like the heavy cold silence of the basement that had followed us through the house earlier that morning. I felt a shift inside me, as if the weight on my shoulders had eased just enough for me to breathe without pain. The children stayed close, their little hands gripping my coat as if I might disappear if they let go. I knelt down to speak to them softly, telling them this was a safe place and that nothing bad could reach them here. Their eyes softened slightly, though fear still lingered like a thin shadow behind their gaze. We were led into a quiet room with a couch, chairs, and a table filled with toys, crayons, and small books. The children moved toward the toys with hesitance, then with increasing confidence as they realized nothing frightening was waiting for them. Watching them sit on the rug and slowly begin to draw in silence made tears rise in my eyes, because I could finally see a glimpse of the safety they deserved. I sank into a chair, feeling my breath return like a slow wave as exhaustion washed over me. My hands shook, not from fear now but from the release of it. Then came the moment I had been dreading and expecting. The officials arrived. 2 of them serious, gentle, and purposeful. They introduced themselves and spoke with steady voices that reassured me without even trying. I knew they were here to help and that they would listen. Still, my heart pounded, because repeating what I had seen in that basement meant dragging the nightmare back to the surface. One of them asked if we could talk privately, so the children would not hear. I nodded and followed them to the hallway, leaving the door slightly open so I could still keep my eyes on the little ones. They asked me to begin from the start and tell them everything in order. I took a slow breath and began the story inch by inch, detail by detail, even when the words felt like sharp stones in my mouth. It took time, because every memory forced me to pause, gather strength, and continue. I described the sound that woke me, the strange glow leaking from under the basement door, the smell that made my skin prickle, and the figure I had seen standing there with movements that were not natural. I described the coldness in the air and the way it felt like something inside that basement was aware of me before I entered. I described the shape, the posture, the slow unnatural tilting of the head, and the way it had turned toward me with an awareness that drained the strength right out of my legs. As I spoke, the officials listened with complete focus, not once interrupting. Their expressions shifted only in the smallest ways, but I could tell they took every word seriously. When I finished, one of them asked a few careful questions, but not in a way that made me feel doubted. They simply needed clarity so they could take action. I answered as best as I could, feeling a strange strength grow inside me with every truth I spoke. There is power in telling your story even when it terrifies you, because the truth itself becomes a light bright enough to push back the shadows. When the conversation ended, they told me gently that what I had done was the right thing, and that leaving the house immediately had likely prevented something far worse. They told me they would contact my son and daughter-in-law, but only after making sure the situation was handled by the proper authorities. I felt a mix of relief and sorrow at the mention of my son, because I knew he had no idea of the danger inside his own home. I imagined his face, his confusion, his disbelief, and then his fear as he realized what had been hiding beneath his feet. It hurt my heart to think of how this truth would shake him, but I knew it had to be done. I stepped back into the room with the children and watched them coloring quietly. Their small shoulders were relaxed now and their faces peaceful. The older child looked up at me and gave a soft smile, one that warmed my heart and confirmed that I had made the right decision. I sat with them on the rug, letting them lean against me as they scribbled bright shapes and colors onto paper. The innocence of their drawings felt like healing, like a reminder that life still had beauty even after terror tried to steal it away. Some time later, my phone buzzed. It was my son. The officials had already informed him that something serious had happened, but they had not told him detail. They left that for me because I was the one who had seen it. I answered the call and heard panic in his voice, a kind of panic born from confusion, fear, and guilt all tangled together. He asked where the children were, if they were safe, if I was safe, and why we had left the house without waking him. I told him we were safe but that he needed to come in person so I could explain everything. His voice cracked slightly as he agreed and said he would leave immediately. While waiting for him I felt a tremor of worry because I knew he loved his children fiercely and the truth of that basement would tear his heart in two. But I also knew he was strong enough to face it. He just needed guidance and support. I held the children close as time passed slowly like thick honey. They grew sleepy and leaned against me with heavy eyelids and soft breaths. I kissed the tops of their heads whispering that everything was going to be all right and that they were brave, safe and loved. Then the door opened and my son came in with a look on his face that I will never forget. Fear, confusion, sorrow, desperation all mixing together. He hurried to the children, hugging them tightly as if needing to feel their small warm bodies to calm the storm in his heart. Then he turned to me with pleading eyes, silently begging me to tell him what had happened. I told him everything, every detail, every sound, every movement, every feeling. His face grew paler with each word and his breath came in sharp, shallow bursts. When I finished he covered his face with his hands and let out a low, broken sound that cracked through the room. He whispered that he had ignored signs for weeks, strange noises, unusual smells, sudden cold spots, unexplained changes in the basement. He thought it was the house settling or the heating system failing. Never once did he imagine something far darker was growing there. His guilt poured out like water overflowing from a shaken cup, but I placed my hand on his arm and told him none of this was his fault. Darkness hides best where good hearts live because they never expect it. He looked at me with gratitude mixed with pain and then pulled me into a tight embrace, whispering, "Thank you for saving my children." After he calmed down, the officials explained the next steps, the investigations, the precautions, and the way forward. My son held his children close while listening, his jaw set with determination. He promised them he would never again ignore anything that felt wrong and that he would protect them with everything he had. I believed him because I saw the resolve burning in his eyes like a steady flame. As the sun climbed higher, the room filled with warm light and the children finally drifted fully to sleep, safe in their father's arms. I watched them breathing softly, their faces peaceful and untouched by the terror we had escaped. And in that moment I felt something deep inside me settle. I realized that strength is not loud or fierce. Sometimes strength is simply the ability to stand up when everything in you trembles. Sometimes strength is choosing to run toward safety instead of pretending everything is fine. Sometimes strength is facing darkness so the children you love never have to. I looked at my son, looked at the children, and then looked at the morning sky. And I knew without a doubt that what I had seen in that basement had changed all of us forever. But we were alive, we were together, we were safe, and we would face whatever came next as a family, strengthened, not broken by the night we survived.